The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spinoff or wherever you get your podcasts. Hello and welcome to Gone By Lunchtime, the Spinoff's politics podcast, which has been away for a short while, but we're back due to popular demand, and by popular demand I mean someone left a message on your Facebook page, Ben Thomas.
It was the most spontaneous outpouring of public enthusiasm for anything I've ever done.
And Annabelle Lee, have you had any people come approaching you in the street saying, what has happened to that incredible Gone By Lunchtime politics podcast produced by the Spinoff?
No, nada.
Well, welcome to you both. We have come in various stages of woundedness. Ben Thomas is fueled by ginger beer, Lemsip, whiskey, or were you just craving whiskey?
The Spinoff is apparently out of whiskey, so I'm just hopped up on Lemsip tablets and 2 tank flu fighters.
And you were trying before to perfect your gravelly Tom Waits style voice.
It's just not happening.
How's your health, Annabelle? You looking well?
I'm in good health. Yeah,
you were
I'm
talking...
doing all right. I've got 4 kids, so my mental health probably isn't as good as what it could be, but otherwise I'm doing all right.
And how far into the premiere season of The Hui on TV3 Sunday mornings are you?
We're coming up to the difficult episode 13.
Oh.
Yeah, and Māori Language Week is approaching, so we're trying to get a little bit more te reo Māori on TV3. We'll see how we go.
Good. Ka pai.
Tino pai.
Ben, kia ora. You have been in Melbourne. That's one of the reasons we couldn't do a podcast, because you fucked off to Melbourne unexpectedly.
I was in Sydney, yeah, for
Sydney,
a week,
exactly, like I said.
For a week of putative holidays.
How'd that go?
I got calls from work every day. You reach a certain age where you realise that the holidays aren't anything to look forward to anymore. It's only time between jobs and death.
On that note,
I wouldn't know. I've never had a holiday.
We're going to talk about Brexit. We're going to talk about Paula Bennett. We're going to talk about other stuff, including Hone Harawira, maybe even the Shewan review and more. Brexit. No one really saw it coming, I don't think, and the British people have decided by a vote of 52 to 48 to escape the European Union. Did you think that was a chance, Ben?
Not even the guys that wanted it knew that it was coming. And now that it's happened, they're like,
I didn't really bother reading too deeply into it, because I just assumed that there was little to no chance that it would happen. So I had to sort of rebuff a commentary opportunity that I got on Friday, because I was like, I know literally nothing about it. Fortunately, in the intervening 3 days, I've become something of an expert. So, so hold on to your hats for some hot takes on Brexit.
I think it's interesting because I was paying quite a lot of attention, but I thought this is just going to go because these things do. But I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that votes have their own kind of, they're organisms, and they have a kind of inbuilt intelligence that will drive them one way because ultimately that's what makes sense. But actually what happened is more people voted to leave the European Union than voted to stay in it. And now they're in this extraordinary kind of, looks like almost free fall. I mean, you look at some of the, and I speak as someone who's got a pension fund in Britain, and you look at the currency going and the finance and the financial markets, It's apocalypse.
$2 trillion wiped off the world's economy. It's quite a lot. Quite a bit of cash.
Look, I think the markets will settle down. What markets really don't like is uncertainty. They probably won't settle down for a while because it doesn't seem like the victorious Leave campaigners are doing anything to kind of bed in any certainty around whether, in fact, they intend to leave at all.
Well, they had no plan, clearly. And David Cameron reportedly said, you can sort your own shit out, or words to that effect.
I disagree with The Economist on this. They said he leaves sort of as a failure and an ignominious place, whereas I think that's actually one of the best parting shots I've heard of in international politics.
I suppose, but there's a difference between leaving with a good line and leaving with a legacy of having not only let your country through a bad decision to allow to promise a referendum.
That's very old media thinking,
and also set lay a path for Scotland to secede from the United Kingdom. That's not a great legacy.
No, that's right. And what he actually did was, unfortunately, because this all came about because of a sort of an imprudent promise that he made to firm up his own support from his backbenchers who were anti-Europe during the previous election, which actually it turned out he was going to romp into anyway, but looked a little tighter in the polls than it turned out to be. So unfortunately, that's kind of come home to roost. But what he did was open the door to, I guess, what you'd call sort of anti-establishment forces, the fringe, the anti-elites, which is this kind of very amorphous, swirling sort of sentiment in the first world in particular that, depending on your analysis, is dissatisfied with the neoliberal consensus, or is, a resurgent proto-nationalism, or is just, idiot pro-wrestling fans in the United States voting for Donald Trump. But it's certainly sort of taking a more sort of coate form, like in terms of the world political landscape.
Yeah, there's obviously, I think, my view is there's a continuum, and at one end there is clearly, because you can hear them speaking and writing on comment threads, there are people who are just racist, and then all the way through to people who, in terms of Europe, had a very reasonable position, which was that they had not had an opportunity to approve this kind of stealthily growing large semi-federal superstate. And then all the people in between. Do you reckon, Annabelle, that it is reasonable to draw a parallel between what's happened in Britain with Farage and some of the populism from Boris Johnson and others via Donald Trump and his appeal to people who, again, just don't like globalisation and those forces, and then back here, our own Winston Churchill Peters?
Well, to be honest, I hadn't really thought of that until you mentioned it. I guess so in terms of the xenophobia, but to be perfectly honest, I actually didn't. What about you?
Yeah, look, I mean, the disaffected is the kind of vein that Peters has been tapping for years. These aren't sort of highly organised political participants. They're people from the pub or the TAB. A few years ago, they would have been people who lost their jobs in the freezing works during the 80s. That was sort of that was kind of his power base in the 90s, and it kind of continues on from there. But what I think is different, actually, in New Zealand, who you see that's been trying to actually take advantage of that sentiment is, in a very sort of all over the place, like a madwoman's shit way, is the Labour Party. During the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, coming out with really quite radical sort of anti-trade, anti-globalisation statements, and I think that's part of what's interesting here is that what going by Twitter and social media and commentary on sites such as the Spinoff is that the same sort of New Zealand kind of slightly academic, intellectual, left-wing intelligentsia that has condemned the Leave vote in the EU and is sort of caricaturing the Leave voters sort of racist, xenophobe idiots, are actually the exact same people who opposed the Trans-Pacific Partnership in New Zealand, which is another international agreement which sets freer movement of labour, freer trade, and does involve giving up some sovereignty, for sort of supranational law.
I mean, there's a difference in scale, I guess, in a large part of that. But I don't know if it was you that was saying this, Ben, or others online on Twitter, which of course is a complete cross section of society, was saying that it was
the Twitter assembly.
There was something amusing to observe about people on the left saying, but the IMF and the financial markets say this will be a disaster, when that's not. Typically, the IMF and the financial markets aren't the great kind of arbiters of wisdom.
And look, it's easy to kind of take pot shots and mock people for this. Both for the left in New Zealand to mock the disaffected in the UK, and for the right in New Zealand to mock the left for their intellectual inconsistency and wishy-washiness. But what it really shows is how hard it is to get perspective on these things when it's happening in your country, and just how hard it is to sort of disengage your intellect from the kind of visceral gut reaction you have to the idea of foreign power over your sovereignty, international incursions into your country and your way of living.
But isn't it also not even in someone else's country, but sometimes in your own country? I mean, one of the experiences, I think, of the whole Brexit episode is that people who were living in London or inside the political media establishment, what they might call the ruling class more generally, basically had no clue that this was really seriously going to happen, because they never met anyone really who would. And I sort of feel as though there's probably to use the much overused phrase, a bit of a wake up call for those of us who do work in media or in the bubble or whatever. I mean, is that I guess, Annabelle, do you think that there is a danger that we might take something, that we can take something from the experience there, of the danger of not actually kind of understanding how ordinary people are living their lives? And is that, maybe this is too much of a long bow, but that same thing happens in New Zealand, and that's broken a bit by what we're seeing with people in their housing situations or blah, 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 that typically we don't look outside that shell.
Yeah, but I think that works both ways. Like, in terms of reporting on Māori issues, you see it quite a lot where you think that people, for example, to draw a long bow, but the shower curtain issue that came up this week, there was, lots being said about it on social media. It was widely reported, and you just assume that most people see why that might be, questionable or offensive. But actually, the vast majority of New Zealanders don't understand why that might be considered unacceptable to Māori. So I think everybody kind of works in their little spheres. And when you do get a vote like Brexit, then it can be a shock to the system, and it's interesting to see the way that the votes broke down. Like, for example, London overwhelmingly voting to stay, whereas the rest of England voting to go. The UK, Scotland and Ireland voting to stay. So yeah.
Yes, Scotland is a fascinating one. To bring it back to New Zealand again a bit, my own view in a way is that if you look at the vote for New Zealand First, remembering that they were out of Parliament the election before last, what term would that have been?
2008 to
2011, yeah. And then even between 2011 and 2014, they were floating under the 5% threshold for a lot of the time. Now, there's no question that New Zealand First and Winston Peters, who always tend to poll lower than whether it's the shy Tory effect or whatever, now they're right up there. It's just taken for granted that they will figure in the next Parliament and very probably the next government. And I wonder if that is the same sentiment that we perhaps haven't been noticing very much, the same sentiment that you mentioned, Ben, that the Labour Party are detecting in their polling and trying to reach out to as they, make these sort of noises towards the RSAs of New Zealand and so on.
Yeah, look, the Winston Peters has made no bones about the fact that he's going after the regions in New Zealand, and there's quite a bit of research that a lot of the regions are suffering, and it's a pretty easy political argument to make, or a rhetorical argument, that Auckland's doing well and Wellington are doing well and Christchurch is being rebuilt at great expense, at the expense of the regions in New Zealand, and this is the same sort of thing. The Jaffas up in Auckland are taking all our money, and now they're coming and buying our houses in Tauranga and Hamilton and Palmerston North as rental properties.
And Paula Bennett is offering $5,000 for people to which whether or not it's a good policy. That the idea of being if you are, or the Ngaruahia situation going back a bit, Annabelle, with Heather du Plessis-Allen dissing it and so on. I mean, I can imagine if you were living in one of those towns in New Zealand, and the idea that people were being paid $5,000 to go and slum it in your community, people who clearly are not about to open small businesses, might be a bit of a kick in the teeth.
Yeah, particularly when groups from within those towns have been trying to get access to like those Housing New Zealand homes, which I think was the case in both Huntly and Whanganui, and being told by Housing New Zealand no when they had whānau from within their own area that wanted those houses. Particularly when they're shipping people into those areas, there's already low employment, no job opportunities. Their housing, isn't great either. So how that's supposed to be a solution, I don't understand.
The interesting thing about when Paula Bennett announced that policy, now infamously one day before Bill English's budget.
Yeah. Without the knowledge of Bill English or John Key.
Without the knowledge of Bill English or John Key. And it was reported, I think, on both news channels as saying that the minister has taken things into her own hands.
Right.
So you can tell where that line probably came from.
Yes.
And the enduring image I've had since then is sort of the minister picking up the ball and running with it and subsequently dropping the ball, maybe falling over the ball. The ball is now burning. It's on fire. A flock of crows is circling the field. It was really quite an extraordinary move from Paula Bennett to try and take the entire homelessness issue, which had been sort of bedeviling the government for about a month, and decide that she was going to be a one-person solution to it, especially one day before the budget. Now, anyone who's got any experience of this, the communications program of the government before a budget is incredibly carefully managed. In order to make any sort of announcement at all, you need to clear that with the Minister of Finance's office, the high ups. It's quite a rigid process. You don't just kind of make a big announcement on the way into the chamber and hope that somebody tells Bill. So she didn't make friends through that process.
To be fair, it was a policy that had kind of been pre-announced a while back, so it was an elaboration of an existing policy.
Didn't they do the same thing? Like they were sending people to Christchurch, offering $5,000 for people to see to move to Christchurch a few years ago.
For other areas.
But have we seen what the results of that been? Like, has it been successful? Have those people stayed there? Were they able to find housing and jobs and those sort of things? Or is this just sort of a knee-jerk reaction that she just sort of flicks out $5,000 before the...
I think it's pretty clear how it was designed in terms of political...
The other thing too is that it also assumes that there's not a housing crisis in those areas already, and what we're hearing is that it's not just Te Puea that are having to open their doors. There's also Marae in the Bay of Plenty that are having to do similar things and run similar schemes to help people who are living in their cars in the regions.
And the Te Puea thing, because we should talk about that. I mean, it's been an incredible example of not only the generosity and resourcefulness of the marae themselves, but also the wider community seem to have been rallying around it. And I don't know. I guess the question that arises is whether or not this is from one point of view, from a big society conservative point of view, this is great. This is the community doing work that they can do because the state they're better doing. From another point of view, it's a shocking failure of the state where an organisation has to come in like that and save people who are really, really on their ass.
Especially given that Te Puea is not actually a housing provider. Te Puea is a marae. It's a community centre, so it's not actually set up or oriented for this sort of activity.
It's not like it's a whānau order body as such.
Yeah, and Te Puea never sought to be a kind of official or recognised provider, although they did seek assistance, once it turned out that they were. So I think there's some, while it does show, it's a very positive sign from Te Puea and from the community in general. I think you'd still kind of weighted in government failure territory.
I think, one of the other points that it highlights is that, there is high Māori unemployment, but what the unemployment statistics don't show is that Māori so often are engaged in voluntary work, and this is an example of it. Unemployed Māori usually do not sit around all day, despite popular belief, watching TV and drinking beers. More often they're engaged in these sorts of community projects, and not saying that everyone at Te Puea is unemployed, all of their volunteer workers, but you'll often find that, Māori are engaged in those sorts of kaupapa, and, you need people like that.
And Huri Moana Dennis, who's the chair of the chair of Te Puea, I mean that he sort of figured in another one of a kind of a 3-part Paula Bennett cock-up circus, and that was when his name was the fact that he was being investigated by police was leaked to a One News reporter by Paula Bennett's press secretary, and that then became a news event in itself. How did you read that, Annabelle? Did you think between innocent mistake and deliberate smear?
It's pretty poor form, isn't it? Either way, I mean, it was discussed confidentially with the minister. It's an employment issue, so for it to be shared with a One News reporter, I mean, at best it's an absolute cock-up, but I tend to think that it was deliberate, and let's be honest, she does have form in that department. But I thought the more interesting leak that week was when it was about to break and go on the 6 o'clock bulletin, conveniently it was the government leaked that Taina Porter was going to receive $2 million in compensation, and so it got pushed back that night. So, the National Safety Net was there to catch her and Lucy Askew. Lucy Bennett, sorry.
Ben, you've been a
sorry.
Lucy
Bennett.
You've been Bennett. You've been a press secretary before for many years, and you've never leaked anything. We can say that.
No, of course not. No.
Never leaked anything to me, Ben.
And you've never been leaked. None of that.
Nothing.
But
like all the characters in the thick of it, I am intimately familiar with the practice and art of leaking, and it is all around at all times. While I myself have never leaked anything.
I don't think there can be any question about that. But can you give us an insight into this? Do you, from the way you're looking at it, which is perhaps slightly different to some of us who haven't been in that position, is it plausible? I mean, is it just the way it works? Should we just say, "Come on, this is the way politics work," and move along? Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, the first thing to say is poor political judgment from Paula Bennett's office. Whether the characterisation of it is as a leak to smear the chair of Te Puea, or the characterisation is this is just shit talk between a press sec and a journalist. This is sensitive information. That perhaps potentially reflects poorly on the government. So it's bad judgment, whatever the motivation. But in terms of the sort of media furore and these kind of slack-jawed, doe-eyed kind of wails that, a minister's office had leaked something. I mean, leaks are the lifeblood of democracy.
Yeah, they're the lubricant that keeps everything going. But Ben, we should be slack-jawed because this guy is not some parliamentarian. He is a private citizen who had the mana to tell the minister that this investigation was going on, and did the smart thing to protect the kaupapa of what he's working on, and for it to be like this, frankly despicable.
Look, either it's a news story or it's not. There have been lots of news stories about people who are receiving public funds being investigated by the police. That's just a fact. So the question for the news organisations who receive this kind of information, which they do all the time, any story in a newspaper which says it is understood is probably a leak. Any story saying we think the report has this in it is a leak of the information in the report. Leaks are happening everywhere without,
sometimes we call them off-the-record conversations.
Crusty old journalists, often presenting to AUT classes, will sort of say, journalism is anything that they someone doesn't want you to know, the rest is PR. Well, actually, that's a description of leaks. Something is only a leak if there is a reason that it shouldn't be released. Now, that could be an administrative reason, like deadlines or timelines that have already been established, or it could be because it's highly sensitive employment relationships. I mean,
But what took this one out of the norm was that it was an individual who was doing something that ostensibly
the
minister was supporting and in favour of.
Yeah, well, I think if the news media was so upset about that, the response would have been to not run the information and not run the story.
Well, that was Rebecca Wright's decision, wasn't it? So Rebecca Wright's decision was that wasn't a story, and so she wasn't going to do anything. Then somehow,
right. But then presumably she leaked.
Well, presumably, yeah, but we can't say.
I think what was interesting is that instead of just running the leak, the media actually questioned it, and I thought that was a good thing. And the story became about the leak itself rather than the target of it.
Yeah, it was interesting.
I think if that's the process that's going to be followed, in the wake of the leak, Labour were circulating some incredible smears about National Party MPs in the press gallery.
But they're MPs, that's
and there were no stories about the smears that Labour were attempting to run, on totally groundless information. And this happens all the time. People fly things.
Yeah, but
they're
parliamentarians, Ben. It's different compared to being a private citizen working in your community, sharing some confidential information with the minister and having that circulated to the media.
Let's come back to this another time, because it's a very interesting area, that kind of, there's the trade-offs and the dark arts and what have you. But there's one other part of this, just before we, of the Paula Bennett very bad fortnight or whatever it was, which I think needs to be mentioned before we move on, which was the flying squad. The news that was conveyed by the Prime Minister to the media, been a flying squad, as it was described, weirdly, of MSD staff with the Salvation Army on the in South Auckland, in an area where there were cars parked up, and they had knocked on 8 cars that had that level of specificity to it, and the people had said they didn't want any help.
They liked it.
And that turned out to be wrong in every part. Every part of that there was no flying squad. The MSD didn't go out with the Salvation Army. There was no knocking on cars, and so therefore there was no one saying they didn't. And that, to me, was striking, partly or largely, not just because every part of it was wrong, which is fascinating, but more to the point because the moral of that little fable was that people don't want help. And then for it to collapse so dramatically struck me as, of all of these things, the one that was somehow the most kind of powerful or evocative.
Well, to be fair, I think the Salvation Army were pretty clear that people didn't want strangers knocking on their car windows. I mean, we could certainly take that moral from it. That remains.
Yeah.
No, but you're right. To be so wrong about an issue that's so in the public eye, and then to steer the Prime Minister wrong about it and make him withdraw and retract.
Assuming that's the case.
That's a heck of a problem.
Yeah. So
and then not to apologise for it, I thought was interesting too.
But there's a lot of pressure building up, wasn't there? And you could argue for someone who's taken all these new portfolios. I think we talked about Paula Bennett last time. Where does this leave her leadership prospects? Is it really knocked her down the chain of the queue, to mix a metaphor?
I mean, the short answer is yes. It has this. Look, people recover, and she's an extremely talented politician.
Yeah.
She's a very good retail politician. She presents extremely well, and I don't think anyone would argue that she hasn't presented well during this period. And so once she kind of gets her policy and the actual substance in line, she can come back. But right now, I think she's taken a real knock in terms of the people that you would immediately think of who could succeed John Key if he was hit by a bus tomorrow.
I think Mikey Sherman said it best when she said Auntie Paula is playing up, and I think that's exactly right. And I think that it took her so long to go out to Te Puea as well. I mean, besides from how she's now thought of within the National Party, but in terms of the general public who care about this issue, that it would take her, weeks to get down to the place that was doing the work of her ministry is poor form.
Meanwhile, just get a very quick thought from both of you on this. Simon Bridges has sort of emerged back in terms of achieving, somehow turning around the cabinet view on road charging.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Simon.
Is that not going to work for your commute, Annabelle?
No, I've got 4 kids to drop off at different places.
Okay. So we'd like Simon Bridge to reconsider that, and we'll go back to the Jerry Brownlee. But he has achieved something there, and he also, similarly on the CRL, he's actually seemed to sort of achieve it. Whether or not it can be attributed to him and his effect in cabinet, I don't know. But there's a bit of a sea change in terms of the thinking about Auckland. There is Simon Bridges back in the picture? Is he back in the picture as a future Prime Minister or leader of the National Party?
I don't know that Bridges has ever been out of the picture. But you're right, he's chalking up some wins. He's successfully reversed the government's slightly retrograde position on the CRL and also congestion charging. So, I think he can keep building his credentials.
Annabelle, Simon Bridges?
I think he definitely has leadership potential. Yeah, I think he just needs to be careful that he's not perceived as being too smarmy, which he can come across as. Again, I'm talking about how he's perceived by the public, not within the party. But, he's smart, he's articulate, he's Māori.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. Well, Paula Bennett's Māori too, so you've got a good
yes,
couple of...
we've got our bets hedged, but I think Simon's possibly a little bit more engaged with his iwi than what Paula is.
And then there's Hone Harawira, future Prime Minister. He's back in play, as revealed, as scooped by The Hui, Sunday mornings on TV3. Annabelle? 9:30 on TV3. The Hui. This is the spin-off. What does it mean? Hone is back. Is he a real chance in Te Tai Tokerau?
I think he has a real chance in Te Tai Tokerau for a couple of reasons. Firstly, his support base is te pani me te rawakore, the poor and the destitute. Fortunately for him, that's a demographic that's growing. So I think he could be in luck there. Secondly, it's hard when you're the leader of a national a national organisation and there's just one of you. You don't have time to go back and take care of your electorate and do the work that you need to do, particularly a Māori electorate, where being a kanohi kitea, a face that is seen as the most important currency that you can have. So I think that he's had the chance to go back to Te Tai Tokerau to get really involved in some community projects, like one, for example, is that he set up a rebel league team in Northland. That might not sound like a big deal, but when you take into account that he lost by less than 1,000 votes, if he's getting a few hundred people out there supporting him, knocking on doors for him, that could make all the difference for Hone. The other thing too is, with the left and with the Greens and Labour teaming up, the Māori Party are going to have to think really strategically about how they manage Waiariki. It's said that they're already starting to have discussions because, Hone is Te Ururua is not going to want mana to come down there and split the vote even more. So, the door's open for discussions.
So it's not just, because I was going to ask you, whereas last time round we had this kind of crazy super alliance between Mana and the Internet Party and Kim.com, and it was amazing. It was a psychedelic trip. This time, is it really Hone Harawira standing as an independent? Is the Mana movement still alive and just not visible to most of us?
Yeah, I think the Mana movement is still alive, and it'll become more visible over the coming months. I think the other thing that might play into Hone's hands as well is that Kelvin Davis is performing so well, ironically, and with him being promoted up the Labour ranks, Hone's going to go to Te Tai Tokerau voters and he's going to say you're going to get two MPs for the price of one. Yeah. Te Tai Tokerau are known for being politically astute. They have the highest voter turnout, so you never know. In a funny way, Kelvin's success might turn around and bite him.
Ben, do you think that whatever you think of some of his views that Hone Harawira is someone that has been missed in this parliament?
No, I actually don't think so. Hone was there the whole time I was there in Parliament. He wasn't a very effective MP. He wasn't a hard-working MP. I don't think he took the time to really get on top of the issues that were affecting his people that he was outspoken about.
He was literally driving off the road because he was having to. I think that's a really.
I think he definitely put in the hours in his.
He may not have been that effective, but I don't think he was lazy.
I mean, little known fact, but. He left the Māori Party ostensibly over the Marine and Coastal Area Takitai Moana Act, which was the replacement of the Foreshore and Seabed Bill, which repealed Foreshore and Seabed Act, which repealed that act. Now he left that and he actually did a Gordon Copeland and missed the second reading. Because he was busy putting out press releases about his strong stand against the act. I mean, he wasn't particularly organised once he left the Māori Party. I mean, Hone is a good guy, and he does care a lot about his electorate, and he's a very passionate guy. But I don't think the parliamentary environment is where he does his best work.
He couldn't have been there. I agree with that. He's a community person. Peter Sharples was the same. Peter Sharples incredibly effective at a community level. Perhaps not so much at a national level, but in terms of Hone being ineffective, we now have John Key talking about feeding the kids. Now, that was a mana party policy. So, for one guy doing it on his own in Parliament with no leverage whatsoever, that's not such a bad achievement.
Quickly on the Panama Papers, the Shewan review, which came out yesterday, and what is this just effective... constructive politics that the Prime Minister, after initially starting off on the very defensive and dismissive, was forced to back down, commissioned a review from an expert. The expert recommended what most informed and intelligent people seem to be saying already, which was that we need to have clearer disclosure rules, better disclosure, more transparency. He's recommended it. That allows the government to enter those changes. Happy? Or is that too simplistic?
No, I think the review was forced by the media, and the review has had a good outcome, which
the opposition, you need to give the opposition some credit for that, no?
Sure. But I think it was very much driven by these sort of Panama Papers stories. Now, what happens when you read the report is that it sort of discloses none of the Panama Papers had any real sort of substance. In terms of the New Zealand stories, it didn't disclose any real.
There was no smoking bomb.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But what it did lead to, which was good, was a thorough review by John Shewan of the provisions. What he found was that probably better disclosure rules would help, that a more active regulator would help, and he actually came up with recommendations that are broadly in line with what the Prime Minister's lawyer, John Whitney, was asking Inland Revenue for when he met with Todd McClay in the widely sort of publicised, elite lobbying kind of scandal. What was sort of lost in the discussion there was that the trust industry was actually asking for tighter regulations and greater disclosure provisions, and the Inland Revenue actually ignored them.
I'm not sure that's completely clear when you look at the paperwork. They were also lobbying them not to go hard on it. They wanted to find a middle ground, right? I mean, absolutely. What I'm talking about is the recommendations. What I'm talking about is the recommendations that they were making are broadly similar to what John Shewan has come out with in his report as the sort of moderate option for which he says will take care of any potential issues. What do you reckon, Annabelle? You excited about the latest trust law?
Super excited. Toby. It shouldn't have taken so long. They knew it was a problem.
Yeah.
As Guyon said, who did the story for 60 Minutes, they've known since 2013. It's the politics of embarrassment. They've done something. There's going to be better tax laws. Has it hurt them? No. Does anyone care? Besides from Ben? Not really. Tra-la-la-la-la.
You touched on...
Disclaimer, we have clients in the foreign trust industry.
Oh, that's right. Thanks.
Better throw that in there for the comments section.
It's Exceltium, which is on TV3 9:30 on Sundays. Finally, Annabelle, you touched on the Lindauer paintings.
The Lindauer paintings.
And the shower curtains. And you mentioned that in terms of people's kind of alertness to the gravity of issues, blah, blah, blah. So, who cares about some paintings on a shower curtain on sale in America, really?
Yeah. It's interesting, because people... some people genuinely think that, and for me it's an eye-opener when I get those, I grew up on Waiheke Island. I have a lot of Pākehā friends that I grew up with. Someone posted a link to the story on my Facebook page saying this is absolutely disgusting, and a guy that I grew up with on Waiheke asked why, and quite simply it's because these images are photos, are pictures of actual people's grandparents, great-grandparents. So to think of strangers not only showering with your dead loved one, but profiting from their image with no, and you having absolutely no say over it is I think any reasonable-minded person would be offended by that. It's nothing really to do about any heebie-jeebie Māori stuff. It's quite simply, it's inappropriate. What's interesting is that the government has had the opportunity to address some of these issues as part of the Y262 claim. It's a pretty old claim. I think it was lodged in 1991. The report came out last year.
2013?
Ko Aotearoa tēnei, is that when it came out, 2013? So there's been a couple of years since, the Waitangi Tribunal made a raft of recommendations that would have gone some way to protecting, these types of images, and to the best of my knowledge, nothing significant has been done, and so you have these issues pop up from time to time.
One problem that's sort of faced by that, because the government has addressed Māori intellectual property issues, on a case-by-case basis. I think probably the high watermark is the haka legislation, which was
Ngāti Toa.
which was part of the Ngāti Toa settlement, and that gives Ngāti Toa a right of veto for commercial use of the kamati haka, and a right of acknowledgement in other circumstances. So, unfortunately, that legislation can't affect people overseas. So we can't outlaw, Italian car manufacturers doing like ridiculous hakas. We can't, and this is always going to remain a problem until we're part of a federalist superstate that makes laws for its members about Indigenous intellectual property and the curvature of bananas.
Are you suggesting that we should hold a referendum on joining
to enter or stay?
On that note, having agreed that it's time for New Zealand to join the European Union, we should say goodbye. Hopefully it won't be as long between drinks until next time. Thank you very much, Annabelle Lee. Thank you very much, Ben Thomas. Thank you very much, producer Jose Barbosa Jobar. This is Gone By Lunchtime. I'm Toby Manhire.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.